The idea of Blink-182 releasing a new album after the departure of Tom DeLonge raised a lot of concerns. I mean, this was something they tried out previously with Boxcar Racer, and we all know how well that worked out. But 2011's Neighborhoods was hardly a pure Blink-182 experience either. Although it featured the original lineup, the album leaned heavily on the electronic moodiness of DeLonge's Angels and Airwaves. While it was a welcome return to form, it felt more like an extension of their 2003 self-titled album than the core Blink-182 sound that their audience found so endearing. With that in mind, California is a return to a more traditional pop-punk sound. The songs are short, sharp and catchy, and the lyrics are once again focused on more tangible experiences rather than the abstract poetry employed on the last two efforts. All of this adds up to elicit that faux experiential nostalgia that Blink-182 have always been so adept at creating, and which has been missing from their songwriting more recently. I've always said that Blink-182 excel when they make me yearn for a past experience I never had, and this feeling is alive and well in California. Fittingly, locations feature more prominently than ever before. Los Angeles, San Diego, and California all act as metaphors to fuel stories of hopelessness, nostalgia, and isolation, all centering around the familiar Blink-182 search for home, a place of familiarity, safety, and security. There's a bit of dissonance in hearing guys in their mid-40s navigate these familiar waters, even if this concern is admirably addressed in the opening track. And yet, in California, Blink-182 have managed to address these concerns with a mature focus, imbuing the album with a feeling of timelessness, where it could have come across as out of touch. Undoubtedly a highlight of the pop-punk genre in 2016, California is a welcome return to form. Aviva.
Whew, man, I don't even know where to start. Blink-182 is, interestingly enough, I think the first band that I fell in love with that was not given to me by my parents. I remember like someone buying me one of those Now That's What I Call Music compilations, and there was a Blink song on there. It was probably All the Small Things, and I remember trying to learn to drum by tapping chopsticks on my dining room table. I was very young, and I remember going out on like a family vacation and hearing a radio in a restaurant play All the Small Things and getting really excited. So I think Blink-182, is one of those bands that has inadvertently become a part of my identity, but I'm totally fine with that. So I, too, was a little bit apprehensive about them pushing forward with a new album, minus Tom, because obviously his voice is such an integral part of the Blink experience. And even though I knew they were bringing in Matt Skiba, who was a very respected vocalist from a band who was also part of the scene, Alkaline Trio, I was a little nervous because his voice is a bit similar to Hoppus's. I can't remember my first impressions of the album because I'm sure I heard the single Bored to Death first, and it's incredibly catchy and has all the tenets of a Blink album. Yeah, I loved the album. I'm happy with it. It's still on my downloaded list on Spotify, and I listen to it pretty frequently, to be honest with you. It's become one of my current default albums to listen to. I liked Neighborhoods.
Yeah. It's interesting, looking at California and then going back and listening to Neighborhoods, it really made me realize how un-Blink-182 Neighborhoods kind of is. It's got a lot of the things that make Blink-182 Blink-182, but it doesn't really sound like a Blink-182 album. And I mean, that was one of the big criticisms of the self-titled album too, was it didn't really sound like a Blink-182 album. And then listening to California, it's pretty incredible how much like a Blink-182 album it does sound, even without Tom's voice in there. I think bringing in Matt Skiba is a really interesting move because he does sound so much like Mark. And I think that there's a danger there that Blink-182 in its current form lose a little bit of their identity that they'd carved out, just in the sense of there are points where I couldn't tell who was singing, which maybe is a familiarity thing, but I think it's also a fairly fair concern that they might start to blend into the fabric of pop punk a little bit more with the current iteration. But at the same time, the songs, they all sound like Blink songs. You could play them and someone would, I think, fairly easily pick up the main reference points for Blink-182. All the songs are very focused, very personal sounding. They're not vague in the same way that the self-titled album and Neighborhoods are. I mean, if you can tell me what Ghost on the Dance Floor is actually about, then
Love that song. Favorite one off Neighborhoods.
Great song. Lyrically pretty obtuse, which I think with Blink-182, because it is all so nostalgic for this youthful experience, runs the danger of transforming itself into bad 15-year-old poetry rather than being a really interesting examination of subject matter, which Blink in the early days was actually really adept at. They're Going Away to College, Aliens Exist. These all managed to, even later songs like Rock Show and things, they all managed to really focus in on a specific experience and communicate that experience in a really interesting way that was pretty sophisticated for the simplicity of the whole enterprise. And you get that again with California. I mean, you have things like Cynical, Bored to Death, Teenage Satellites, and even, as I say, California, San Diego. These are all very clear descriptions of situation and experience that really sell this as a Blink-182 album.
I think it would be interesting to see where Fall Out Boy, Blink-182,
Sum 41,
Green Day, Sum 41, Our Dearly Departed, My Chemical Romance, how these artists are coping with a loss of youth, because as you said, they created landscapes for the young, and now they are married and not youths anymore. And it's interesting because the lead singer of Brand New, Jesse Lacey, was saying in his concert the other night, as he opened the show, he was talking about how strange it is to perform songs that were written when he was 20 years old, and to now be 37 and still performing songs where the hook is, you're just jealous because we're young and in love, but you're no longer young. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So what do? Do you change? In his case, he changes the lyrics. But in Blink-182's case, they're once again returning to their youth. In that song, She's Out of Her Mind, they're talking about this punk girl with Bauhaus stuck in her head. And it's interesting to me because, in Taking Back Sunday, I believe that they aged their music. You know what I mean? Like, their music grew up with them, which is another way of doing it. And in some albums by Taking Back Sunday, it works better than others. I thought California was an excellent recapitulation on their old styles. And it made me feel like they could produce another 5 albums and I'd still listen to them, and it wouldn't be, I'm just listening to them for the novelty of saying I listen to Blink-182 still. Like, no, they would be solid and they would be true to form.
It's interesting because I guess in the mid-90s and even early 2000s, when Blink was really hitting that peak period of success, every single music journalist really went out of their way to point out that, hey, you won't be able to do this when you're 40. What are you guys going to do then? And then it's really interesting that in sort of the mid-2000s onwards, we had this incredible wave of nostalgia like wash through the music industry, where nostalgia became this really commodified experience. And I wonder now if Blink-182 had just kind of kept going with their original shtick, they probably could have made themselves a sort of a cottage industry for that, and people would probably pay for this sort of escapist, juvenile experience of Blink-182 if they'd kind of kept churning it out. But I think to their credit, of all the bands, they've managed to keep their identity the most.
Yeah, I agree. They've grown up, but they have not grown old, thank goodness, for Blink-182, and I hope the rest of us can also benefit from their youthful energy and ways of connecting with a past that we're not even sure ever happened.